So, a couple of years ago I was going through Yahoo auctions and came across a V12 engine, the Toyota Century one, and it was really cheap. I did my calculations and it was going to cost less than $2,000 to have it landed here. And I thought, you know, I've always wanted a V12, just any V12. It's always tickled my fancy, and I thought, less than $2,000. I think this is my time. So I hit buy, and I got it here, and well, I didn't even know what I was going to do with it, right? I'm thinking, I'll find a car to stick in it, surely. I mean, it could just sit there until something comes along. And, well, something did come along. I got a Lexus GS300, and I thought, well, mint. I can fit that in there. It's actually, it looks like a Toyota Century. It almost looks like that engine goes straight into it, as if they're on the same chassis, you know. So I made the plan. I'm going to put the V12 in the GS300, but well, I don't even remember what happened. But the next thing I knew, we were tearing a Supra apart. Do you remember?
See, I do remember this bit. This bit to me was actually a lot of fun. We wind each other up a fair bit with stupid and silly ideas at the best of times. But you had the Supra, and you were thinking about restoring it or holding on to it for a while and keeping it fairly original. Like we'd gone to the point where you'd taken spray and sprayed up all the engine components so they all looked really nice and neat and shiny and new.
Oh yeah, I remember that. I'm thinking,
restoring all sorts.
We're going to make this car completely stock and restored, and I'm going to keep it for a long time till this way off time in the future when it's like, hey, look at my untampered with Supra, and people would be like, that's the only one left in the world that someone hasn't mucked around with.
Pretty much, and it's bright red. I mean, it's probably the best color for one of those things. But at the same time, you were talking about putting this potentially amazing V12 engine into a heavy sedan, and God, it couldn't have gotten much more boring if you tried. So a few of us, I can't take all the credit on this one, but a few of us kind of kept needling in the direction of, wouldn't a V12 Supra be cool? And wouldn't it be cool to do one again and like do it with today's technology and really, you know, give it that WTF flavor as well, really make something of it?
I must have objected to it, surely. I must have gone, that's way too hard. Like, we know the engine doesn't fit naturally in that bay. Everybody knows it. That's why Top Secret did the dry sump and stuff, because they're like, we want it down here, but it doesn't fit here.
Oh, yeah.
And I didn't.
No, you didn't. You didn't. There was plenty of that. There was plenty of, but what if we need a different subframe? But what if I have to cut the firewall? But the gearbox won't put up with it if we push too much through it, so I'll have to replace that, and then that won't fit. I mean, there was all sorts involved in that part of it, but I think the GS300 with the V12 would be boring, and afterwards worth next to nothing to anyone really. Nobody's really going to look at that and go, ooh, I need a really big, heavy luxury car with a V12 engine. But V12 and a Supra, I mean, that could be a thing. More than that, it's exciting. Like, you'd get attention for that. That'd be a halo car for the workshop. That'd be fun to drive. I mean, you've always wanted a big V10 or V12 engine anyway, so having that in the Supra.
I remember it starting off pretty subtle. It's like, you know what, I wonder if we can throw a little bit of boost into it as well and make a little bit of horsepower.
We started looking up engine specs.
Oh yes, trying to find pictures of like connecting rods to see how big they were, because I mean, we know these engines just from some pictures we saw were really similar to Camry V6s.
Yes,
and we know how to snap Camry V6 rods because we turbocharged a bunch of those engines, and we took them to the point where those rods started bending and snapping and trying to punch out the side of the block, so we know what they could take. So we started looking for pictures of V12 internals. It was really hard to find anything.
Really hard.
Which is, I mean, that really inspired me to actually pull one of these apart so we could find out more about it. But we did find pictures eventually, and it looked really discouraging.
It did, yeah, it didn't look like it was ready for boost. But I think that's when we started going down the line of, what are the stock measurements? What are the dimensions of the pistons? What are the dimensions of the cams? What kind of valves were they running? could we find a commonality between those parts and something else? Could we upgrade them with something from something else? In the same way that we started looking at mixing and matching cams and stuff from different engines of the V6s, we started looking down that path as well with the V12.
Right. I do remember though that the bore and stroke and the piston size, it didn't really line up with anything else from Toyota that was going to be useful for us. So we kind of figured straight away we were going to be in for some custom stuff, but not discouraged.
No, I think at that stage the seed had been planted. The inspiration was there. It was now, this sounds interesting, and
eventually I guess the idea of putting it in a Supra just overrode everything, and I just couldn't wind myself back to the idea of putting it in the GS300 anymore. I had to do the Supra. It was too much in my brain. So one night we just got the camera rolling and took a plunge and pulled the 2JZ out, and there was no going back at that point, really.
I think, yeah, classic case of just having a few a few good mates just to keep needling you, knowing you well enough to know how to needle you, and just kind of put that idea, that seed of an idea in your head. Yeah.
So, I mean, it's been you'd almost call it a tedious year or two getting to this point, because it's mostly been put it in there, it doesn't fit, take it back out, remove some stuff, put it in there, it fits now, but it's not where we want it to be, or it's not on the right angle, take it out. Take some more stuff out, relocate some things. And I think we spent a good 6 months. I mean, we knew the engine was here, but we wanted it to be here.
Yep.
And it's like, stuff's in the way. So do we move stuff off the engine, or do we move stuff off the car? Because both are valid ways to get to putting the engine in the right spot. One way, we had to remake the upper sump of the engine.
Yes.
Which was a huge thing to think about doing. It's not like you can just weld a bit of metal or something like that. It's such a complex piece of the engine. The other way was spacing the steering rack and the frame and everything down lower, so that the engine with the original upper sump would sit there. And I didn't like that idea either, because it would cause issues with engineering and licensing. They would not like that we're changing the suspension geometry.
Let's be honest. The big problem was that you knew it just wasn't right. It didn't feel right. You were losing that ground clearance. You knew it just wasn't in the right spot. I mean, I remember you telling me about one of the ways some of the hot rodders do it when they put in bigger engines, where they actually take the subframe, leave the sides on, and then basically cut the middle out where the engine interferes, and just bolt like a U-shaped bit underneath to then support it. And I remember the look on your face telling me about that idea too. Clearly that wasn't going to fly.
No. There's a thing where I guess it's just a little bit of a OCD sort of attitude, where it's got to be done to a certain level. And sure, I can just put the engine there, and all I got to do is like just not run a sway bar or something, and everything would be great. But no, I can't do it. I can't do that. Or I could, I could run the engine a little bit more forward, and then we wouldn't have to modify the tunnel in any way at all, because the big part of the transmission would just move that little bit forward. Everything would be solved. But no, I have to create days and weeks of extra work to move the friggin' engine back like an inch. But, I really think this is a car that I will just build and I will keep forever. And it just grated on my mind while I was trying to decide which way to build it. 20 years from now, 30 years from now, why didn't I just spend the extra time just to make it, just to get that inch? Because now the car's done, it's wonderful, but that inch is always going to bother me, So we ended up committing to like what has ended up being an extra year of tedious work. And it's not full-time work, don't get us wrong. We don't do this car every day.
No.
We do this car for maybe one Friday evening every month. Sometimes once every 2 months, not a lot of time in it.
Yeah.
So, if this was a full-time job, it probably would have taken us a couple of weeks to get to this point. But it's dragged out for a long time. But now we're at the point where we've done all of that tedious stuff. The engine is genuinely exactly where we want it, exactly on the angle we want it, and we've actually been able to design some parts.
Yes.
And here we are now. That takes me to the next part of the story, right? Because we needed a part. I had the idea of the part I needed, and we had access to the machine that could make it.
Yes.
But nothing in between, right?
No, nothing at all.
Nothing at all in between. I mean, absolutely zero in between. We didn't have the skills, we didn't have the knowledge, we didn't have the material, we didn't have anything. We just had an idea and a machine. And there's so much more between that than you realize. So I remember I said, well, obviously I don't want to hand make it. Like, I could make a one-off sump, but then let's say somebody else wanted one or I wanted another one. I'd never make another one again. I know what it's like to hand make something really complicated. And after it's done, you're like, that took at least 17 times longer than I wanted it to. I'm never doing that again for anybody, no matter what. Yeah. So I thought I got to do it in such a way where I could do another one again if I wanted to. So that meant billets and CNC milling. That was the only way that was going to satisfy me. So I thought, well, what's the first step? I've got to learn how to model on a computer. I need to know CAD drawing.
Well, I think it was actually slightly more than that. It wasn't just, you have to learn this. I think the original step was, I need to talk to someone who knows this and tell them what I want them to design for me. And then suddenly realizing that that's not something easy to describe out of your head to somebody who doesn't necessarily get engine parts and can't really visualize what you're talking about. And even if you show them the parts, it doesn't necessarily line up the way you know it should. I think the problem was trying to translate, to explain what it was you were trying to do to someone who understood the software side of it.
Right, and we tried. I remember we tried going, this is what we want. It has to kind of be like this sump and kind of be like that sump. There you go. And to make it, and you need to be able to get to these bolts from this direction, and that's got a bolt on there, and this has to be the same as that. And it's overwhelming to someone that isn't like full-time into cars and car parts. There's too many little intricate things that are hard to communicate. So after, I'd say, a couple of failed attempts of getting someone to draw this for me, that's where I went, look, there's only one way this is going to get done, and that's if I do it myself. So yeah, I bought my license for, well, I went online and I said, what software to do 3D drawing? And you know, the internet said, this one is good and that one's crap. And then it also said, this one's good and that one's crap. And then people start fighting about which one's good. I didn't know where to go. So I just kind of closed my eyes and went, that one. I ended up with Fusion 360 and I'm actually pretty happy with it.
Yeah.
I won't say it's the best or worst out there because it's the only one I've ever used. But I'm pretty happy with it. I think it's a pretty good package. And I started learning how to use it. And, well, to say that I didn't know how to draw a line on the screen would be 100% accurate. Like, if someone said to me, look, can you just draw a line? I'd go, I can do it in MS Paint. I don't know what to press in CAD software. So I thought, well, crash course, YouTube, right? Fusion 360 for absolute muppets. Enter. And I came up with this fella called Lars. He seems to be pretty well known. Lars, right? And Lars talks with what I describe as not a bit of an accent, but a bit of 10 different accents. You know, when you're listening to someone, if they're an accent, you know you can calibrate your brain to listen to them and understand what you're saying. But Lars speaks with what appears to be a mix of more accents than I can count. And trying to follow one sentence of his talking is so brain intensive that there's almost nothing left over for learning how to draw on the screen. No offense to Lars, absolutely wonderful, wonderful guy, and he's put so much energy and time into showing people how to use Fusion 360 online, right? But oh my God, I can barely understand him. I was just sitting there going, listen back, listen back, listen back, just repeating bits over and over until I finally figured out what words he was saying. So I went through his beginner videos for, I'd say, 2 days. And at that point, I learned how enough to do like a sphere and a round thing and a line, and it showed us how to make it was like a coffee scoop, like a scoop for coffee granules.
I remember that. Yeah.
It's basically a glorified spoon.
Yeah.
A couple of days I can make a spoon, right? You remember seeing that one?
I remember that one.
Yeah.
I remember that one.
And I thought, right, I've got this down pat. I'm basically a master now. Let's draw a sump.
Yeah, I guess it's nothing like having the motivation of, I'm not just drawing this for fun. I'm not just drawing this for the exercise of learning, how to do this type of angled part or something. It's, no, this is the thing I actually want. So if I have to learn how to make a beveled edge, well, I guess I'm going to go and find out how to make a beveled edge and just start applying the different things.
Yeah, and that's what it was. I knew that what I was trying to draw was very complex, but I'm like, well, it doesn't matter how complex it is, as long as it can be broken down into tiny bite-sized chunks.
Yep.
So first I learned how to just draw some 2D images to work off, and then how to extend them out into something three-dimensional.
The flanges.
The flanges, yes. And, we had a little help with the flanges as well, courtesy of the CNC machine, because it was able to go around and actually probe the location of holes, so that would be mapped out perfectly. So we had two accurate bolt patterns to start off with for the top and the bottom of the sump. Yep. But then that's where things, got complicated. And it's one of those things where I don't think I could convey to this camera how difficult and complicated this sump is, because you look at it and you see the major pieces, but you do not see all the fine intricacies. These tiny little channels where it allows oil to drain from multiple different tubes running down the block. I mean, you stare at this thing for hours and you don't notice those things. It's only when you go to actually make it, you're like, what's this? What's this? What's this? What's this? Little locating dowel holes, and everything's got to be millimeter perfect. If it's not millimeter perfect, it just won't click into position. It's nuts, but kept persisting and definitely yelling at the computer screen a lot. I mean, I was swearing my head off at this thing, because when you don't understand the software and you've never done these complex things before, and you say, I want you to draw a line from this thing to this thing, and it says, I can't.
Yep.
And you say, why? And it says, because. I'm like, just draw it. Look, I'm looking at it. It's here and it's here. There's no reason why it can't be there. Yes, there is. Why? Because.
Yep.
And what do you type into Google? Why won't Fusion 360 let me draw a line from this to this? I mean, you're not going to get an answer, right? So I just had to beat my head against a wall, sometimes sleep on it, come back to it the next day and try and attack it a different way, or just delete everything and start again. That happened more than once.
Yeah.
But we ended up with a sump. And, I remember then you basically asked me, you said, is it going to fit?
Yeah, that was my biggest, not suppose fear, but question of the whole thing. It's one thing to design it and look at it on screen and to have done the measurements and everything, but yeah, the difference between the digital world and reality, and do we know how accurate the software is going to be, and hell, do we even know how accurate the machine's going to be that turns that piece of code into, an actual piece of metal at the end of it, and then has to line up with a 20-odd-year-old engine. Even that could have changed in that amount of time. It was a real concern. Would it work?
Right. So I thought, well, how can we make one really cheaply without wasting a big chunk of metal, right?
Well, yeah, because that was the thing. And that was an underestimation in my head as well, going through the early stages of that, was just, I didn't realize just how expensive a big enough billet to make a single sump out of was going to be. And I get there's a fair bit you can get back through recycling if your machinist takes care and all, but that's still an expensive chunk of metal. The raw stock is really pricey.
That was $800 chunk of aluminium, and one little thing wrong and it can be useless.
Yep.
I thought, well, wouldn't it be great if we could make it like a wood one or something? So I asked the machine operator, can we make a wood one? He says, no. serve, because all the wood fibers get into the slides of the machine and get stuck there and corrode things and make a mess of everything. So he says no wood. MDF? No MDF. What else can we use? It's got to be rigid. We can't use high density foam or anything like that. So I thought nylon.
I remember this one because I thought this was the best idea, because we were tossing around a bunch of different ideas at this stage. Send it away to a rapid prototype shop and get them to make something up for us.
And I did get them to quote it. They wanted several $1,000s to rapid prototype this plastic sump, and I'm like, that's more than the aluminium one.
We can make 10 of them for that. Yeah, and get them wrong. God, no, I didn't even realize that. You got a quote on those. I just remember we got to the point where you were talking about trying to find a big chunk of nylon, and maybe if we cooled it or froze it, it would have similar properties, but, you know, less wear in the machine. And I loved this idea because it wasn't just, you know, get someone to make a copy and we see what it's like. We'll use the same machine we're planning to use to cut out the metal and test in plastic. We'll get an exact copy. We're testing the design, we're testing the machine itself, all of those tolerances. They should all add up. It should be the same. It should be an exact copy of what we want if it's machined the same way. And I loved that idea. I thought that was brilliant.
It was a wicked idea, but in the end, I called every plastics place I could and said, how much for a block of nylon in this dimension? And the cheapest I found was $500. I'm like, if I'm going to spend $500, I might as well just spend $800 and just wing it. Yep. And if it happens to be right, hey, I've actually got a useful sump, not a useless piece of plastic that I can never do anything with except for display on the wall or something like that. So I'm not going to spend $500 on a block of plastic for nothing. So we started thinking of alternate ideas. We really got stuck on this for about a week, I'd say. Like, how are we going to prototype this? And eventually started going, you know what? Those rapid prototype places, they use 3D printers. What's the cheapest 3D printer we can buy?
Because they're all the same.
Yeah. What's the cheapest adequate 3D printer we can buy? And you know, we came across, I think it was suggested to us, the Creality brand of printers, because they are super simple, super basic, quite robust, large, so we can print large things with it, and really quite affordable. So, you know, I hopped on eBay and came across one place that was actually doing a special on them, $590.
Cheaper than a chunk of plastic.
No, right? $590 for a complete 3D printer that can not only do prototypes of this sump and as many as we want, it can do the next parts we have to make as well. We can keep using this printer throughout the whole build.
Oh, yeah. And any more.
Yeah. And, you know, the amount of plastic that we had to buy to print the sump cost $40.
Oh, wow. Okay, yeah, that's very different.
Yeah, very different.
Wow, we can print out so many for the same price.
Yes. So I bought it, and then I ended up exactly back where I was. I had a machine, and I had no idea how to use it. So I'm like, guys, does anybody know how to 3D print stuff? And luckily, we had some people put their hands up and actually go, oh yeah, I do that stuff all the time. So we got some hints, we got some help setting it up, and got printing pretty quickly. The only problem we had really was that filament we bought was faulty, and it took me about a week to find the fault. But it was just so crappy that maybe 1 or 2 times a roll, it'll just have a bulge in it where it'll get jammed up in the printer. I'm like, what's wrong with this printer? Why don't I know how to use these things, you know? And I thought it was my fault, of course, because I'd never done this before. But we eventually figured out the filament, and that's where we are now. We've printed out the sump, we've bolted it to the engine, and it fits. And now we're making it for real.
Yeah. I have to admit, I enjoyed the 3D printer part. I enjoyed seeing that come together and like actually being able to see the design physically, like have a good look at it, see how it lined up on the engine and everything else.
So exciting.
And it was nice to have something you didn't have to be too delicate with either. Like if something wasn't quite right or we were worried about clearance, we could actually just have a go.
Yeah, or I could try and smash it off the printer with a hammer. Or
Ideally not, but yes, that was the thing
that
too.
happened, right?
It did, and it didn't actually damage it. It was still a very functional piece. I wouldn't have been so quick to take to a chunk of aluminium with the same hammer.
Yeah.
But you know, but yeah, that was fun, and it was informative, it was educational, and it was really helpful. But watching the billet of aluminium become the sump, and knowing what it's going to be, like an actual finished product part we're going to put on the car, bolted on, and it's a part of it. It's really exciting.
I think this is the most exciting thing I've done with cars in all the 20 odd years I've been doing this. I mean, watching that go from a block of aluminium and start roughly taking shape.
Yeah.
And it is a long process. I mean, there's hours and hours of machining in this. So I've been able to watch it go into something that vaguely looks like a sump, but it's very lumpy and it's very coarse. And then each of the sides start sort of fettling down into the final shape and ending up looking like the final thing. And you start seeing that fine machining with that beautiful CNC like texture to it. And now it's like we really know we're doing this.
Yeah, it's serious time. But it's that, and you're right, it's something new. It's almost like there's another step we've just taken, going into this world of, you know, having something cut out with a 3D machine's really, it's a step forward. It's a new technology, it's a new tool, and I've been wanting to do something like this or see something like this for ages. There's some really good CNC parts out there, and to do on ourselves and put it on this car, I'm excited.
And we know we're at the start of the really interesting part of this project, because it's just make this, and then we're going to make this, and then we're going to make this, and all these great parts are going to start flying onto this motor. And a lot faster this time, because I don't need to learn how to CAD draw or 3D print or whatever anymore. And even just, to be honest, learning how to 3D draw is only one thing. Learning how to 3D draw something that's possible to physically cut with machining tools, that's something entirely different. And there's a lot of consultation with the machinist back and forth going, yeah, that's great that you put that bolt hole there, but there's no tool in the world that can go there and actually put that hole there where you put it. So, you know, all that learning has been done, and I understand it now, and I've watched the machine in action, cutting all these things and making all these things, and I know how to design the next bits as well. So now we can start banging out so many cool parts, and I don't want to give away to everybody what all of these parts are.
No.
But I mean, the little bit I will say is that when you look in the engine bay, I'm not sure you'll be able to see anything that's not CNC machined out of a billet.